Let's talk Skyward Sword. Since its release in 2011, the game's reputation has gone from being hailed as another great entry in the Zelda franchise to...
The ghost of your father just turned his back on you. Your ancestors are clawing their way deeper into the earth to get away from you. You make me embarrassed to have thumbs.
But this isn't a video review about Skyward Sword, this is a video about adventure structure. Skyward Sword is a game with great structure. Maybe that's not saying much because it's a Zelda game and most Zelda games have been following the same structure since 1986, but Skyward Sword stands out in the series because of how it evolves that structure. Skyward Sword is a game about growth, transforming the player into a hero, and every aspect of its game design is based around that. This becomes clear when you analyze the overall design under the lens of Joseph Campbell's monomyth. Campbell was a literature professor most famous for his comparative mythology book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. In it, he compared the stories and myths across cultures, ages, and religions and found that they can all be structured the same way. A person will leave home, face various trials, transform, and return as a hero. If that sounds familiar, it's basically every Zelda game. This theory is otherwise known as the hero's journey. There are 17 stages to the hero's journey, but we can really simplify them down to 8 key moments, which we can credit to Dan Harmon.
I'm Dan Harmon and I shit gold. Pay attention to what you're told. Crafting story is my art. This is why I'm the guy that created laser fart.
He's probably not known so much for shitting gold as being the creator of TV shows Community and Rick and Morty, 2 series which exemplify the kind of storytelling guidelines Harmon has been championing since the beginning of his career. Harmon calls this the embryo, or story circle.
Let's ask ourselves, what is a story?
Oh my God in heaven.
Of course, this thing is just a circle. You'd think it was so goddamn complicated.
And funnily enough, every Zelda game can be broken down into these 8 steps. Here is a typical Zelda game under the story circle framework. It boils down to you, the protagonist, in a familiar or known world where you feel like something is missing or not quite right. That's the call to adventure. You have a need that's unfulfilled. You need to explore this dungeon. You go. You leave your place in the known world of Hyrule, crossing into the threshold of what's known as the special or unknown world. Here you search for a way to beat the dungeon while it challenges you with traps, puzzles, and enemies, the road of trials. When you overcome those trials, that's when you find what you were looking for. Both Campbell and Harmon call this the meeting with the goddess, where the hero could receive a special gift of the goddess to push them along the journey. This is a short reprieve from the action where the hero is rewarded for their troubles in some way. This reward could be a map, a compass, or the dungeon item in the Zelda game. And here you begin to transform. As the circle shifts from right to left, we see the hero go from being a passive force into an active one. On the right, stasis. On the left, growth. You found the way to beat the dungeon, so now you take it. You beat every enemy, solve every puzzle, collect every treasure, discover every secret. And now there's nothing left for you to do in this place. You got what you wanted, but you also pay a price for it. The hero realizes that they need to leave the special world behind and bring the adventure to its end. So you get ready to leave the special world by fighting the dungeon boss, collecting your heart container, and crossing the threshold to return to the normal world. Changed. The master of both worlds. As you can see, the opposite halves of this circle represent reflecting themes. Top and bottom represent the state of the world. The normal, known, familiar world, and the special, unknown, unfamiliar one. Right and left represents the state of the hero, going from the unproven, reactive, passive force that's affected by the world around them, to the worthy, active force that affects the world on their own terms. But if all Zelda games can be structured this way, what makes Skyward Sword so special? Well, it's all about how these circles link together. If you consider each dungeon its own circle, then Hyrule is the space between adventures. You go into the dungeon, do your thing, grow, leave, and then find the next one. What happens between dungeons isn't nearly as impactful as what happens within them. See, there's nothing new for you to do once you get back to that area of Hyrule that you left behind. If there's nothing new to do, there's no adventure. If there's no adventure, we need to throw that location away and move on to the next one. But a Zelda game will ask you to go back eventually, and it would be in the form of a fetch quest. Go back to some village to pick up some key item so that you can move on in the story. You know the old saying, it's about the journey, not the destination? This is a prime example of the opposite. When you return to an old spot in Zelda, it's all destination and no journey. All you care about is being able to move on, and not so much how you get there. And why should you, if nothing new is being offered? What makes Skyward Sword different is that you're constantly returning to old locations rather than discovering new ones. That might not sound super exciting, but every time you go back to these old locations, every time you've grown as a hero, you have the chance to discover something new about it. These areas and the way you explore them evolve as you progress through the game. Return becomes rediscovery as a place you thought you knew suddenly becomes unfamiliar. The circle rotates and the adventure continues almost seamlessly. Faron Woods is a great example of what I'm talking about with these rotating or linked circles. For most of Act 1, Skyward Sword is pretty standard Zelda. You go from sky to province to dungeon, back to sky, and then to the next province. Compare that to Wind Waker, where you go from Great Sea to island to dungeon, back to Great Sea, and then to the next island. Yeah, they're pretty much the same. But by Act 2, Skyward Sword has you return to Faron Woods to find a trial gate. The game sets this up narratively by telling Link that he needs to power up his goddess sword. It's basically a fetch quest. Go back to this spot, get a power up, and then continue with the story. So Faron Woods is already part of your known world. There's nothing presented here that's really challenging or interesting, but then you find the trial gate and cross over into the Silent Realm. This is crossing a threshold from the normal world into the special one. You go from the known world of Faron Woods into the unknown world of the Silent Realm. It's still technically the same location, but with new rules and challenges. Beyond this trial gate, you search for spirit tears that will make your spirit grow. Find them all, and you receive a literal gift of the goddess in the form of the water dragon's scale. Now you return to the normal Faron Woods, but your change actually opens up brand new possibilities for exploration and adventure in this space. As you leave behind the Silent Realm, the normal Faron Woods becomes repopulated with new and stronger enemies. If that's not enough, new underwater sections become available for you to explore, turning an old spot into something new and exciting. After fully exploring all of that, you meet the water dragon, who tasks you with going back to Skyview Temple, the first dungeon of the game, and bringing her healing water. When you go to the Skyview Temple, it's changed too, full of new enemies and new puzzles, making it special once again. Here's what's cool about the last couple shifts. By introducing new, stronger enemies, it brings us back to our original reason for coming to the woods, upgrading the goddess sword. Except now it's not just a narrative need, but a gameplay one. Once you get the water, you return to Faron Woods, gain access to the Ancient Cistern dungeon, and the sequence ends. This part of the game revolved around one location, but it evolves and surprises you, slowly unfolding its mystery along your adventure. The game puts you on 3 connected adventures to reach one dungeon. This keeps the revisit a fresh part of the adventure and not a stale list of tasks. It's backtracking, technically, but I'm also discovering something new, and that makes it fun. It's about the journey, not the destination. But while this is a great example of how Skyward Sword is built on linked story circles, it's not an example of Skyward Sword being great. If getting the magic water felt like a padded fetch quest to you, this will help you understand why. Take our 4 circles and consider what you do in the game for each one. Here you challenge to the Silent Realm. Here you use your new tool and face off against stronger enemies. Here you face stronger enemies in an old dungeon. And here you challenge a new dungeon. Padding in a game means hitting a double beat in the player's story. In circles 2 and 3 you essentially learn the same lesson, that the game is going to be more challenging. While circle 3 sets up something narratively later on in the game, it teaches nothing new to the player. Remove the water fetch quest and the player still learns everything that they need gameplay-wise. But it's still a strong example of the adventure design in that when you return, things change. That is the DNA of this game. Skyward Sword further emphasizes this through the side quests offered in Skyloft, Link's home. Going back to our circle diagram, our known and unknown worlds are the sky and the surface respectively. Each time you need to continue the adventure, you journey to the surface. Each time the adventure is done, you come back to the sky. Every time you come back to Skyloft with change, you can make things better for the people around you. The more people you help, the more heroic you become.
That is the basic motif of the hero journey. Leaving one condition, finding the source of life to bring you forth in a richer or more mature or other condition. A hero properly is someone who has given his life to something bigger than himself or other than himself.
The hero's growth, their change, is only meaningful in how they're uniquely able to help the people around them once they go back home. This is why Jack needs to climb down the beanstalk and share the treasures. This is why Wendy needs to leave Neverland and go back to London to grow up. This is why Aang needs to leave the Lion Turtle and defeat the Fire Lord. In Skyward Sword, this is why you go back to Skyloft after each dungeon. With each new ability or tool you gain from your adventure in the special world, you're presented with the opportunity to help others when you go back home. And that is Skyward Sword's side quest. Characters will tell you when something is troubling them and ask for your help in a way that you, as the hero who has grown from your adventures can. In most Zelda games, side quests exist mainly to help yourself. Collect pieces of heart, get more rupees, unlock more abilities. The express purpose is to make your situation better. But the side quests in Skyward Sword don't bring you any immediate benefit. The gratitude crystal reward instead helps the kind demon Batro transform into a human, which also makes Skyloft monster-free and safe for people to stroll during the night. The express purpose is to make everyone else's situation better, not just your own. I've been talking about how the structure and themes of the hero's journey are present in the adventure gameplay, but it's also an important part of the adventure story. The story circle is very character-driven, as the major characters in a story ought to be facing their own personal journey. Skyward Sword is probably the most character-driven Zelda game, as even minor characters like Fledge and Batro undergo literal transformations over the course of the game, and the slightly more important character, Impa, goes from a stoic, severe warrior to a helpful, nurturing mentor, and much older woman. But the most meaningful transformation can be witnessed in the characters who go to their journey on the surface. These are the characters that experience a personal arc and can have it represented in the story circle. From the start, Link is just a normal guy living a life of peace with his best friend Zelda. When she's taken beneath the clouds, he needs to bring her back home. Link goes to the surface, faces many dungeons, monsters, and puzzles as he searches for her, and when he finally finds her, his literal meeting with the goddess in the monomyth, he pays a serious price. He needs to embrace his destiny as the chosen hero and destroy the Demon King Demise once and for all in order to bring Zelda back home. He finally returns to his best friend's side in a world of peace, changed from average knight in training into a full-fledged hero. But that's not all, as Fi, the personification of the Goddess Sword and Link's companion, begins the game asleep in her pedestal. When the Goddess Hylia's plan is set in motion, she needs to fulfill her purpose as the hero's sword. She goes with Link on his journey, facing the same monsters, dungeons, and puzzles as she searches for a way to complete her mission. She transforms into the Master Sword and finally fulfills her mission in defeating the Demon King. However, Demise is not so easily destroyed, and Fi realizes that her role is to be the blade that seals away darkness, trapping the essence of the demon inside herself. Fi can no longer continue her adventure with Link because she must seal herself away with Demise. She returns to her pedestal and rests, changed into the Sword of Legend. Groose starts as a jealous, obnoxious bully pining after Zelda. He needs to prove himself to her, so when she goes missing, he goes with Link to the surface. He has trouble adapting to the new situation. For all his boasting, he's ineffectual when it comes to the actual dangers of the journey. He searches internally for a way he can help Zelda, casting off the shell of ego from his previous life, building the Groosinator. He finds his chance to help Zelda with his new machine, supporting Link's quest as his ally. This makes him realize that he was never meant to be the big, important figure he always fashioned himself to be. But he's okay with that because he knows there are bigger things at stake, and all he really wants is for Zelda to come back home safely. When he returns to Skyloft, he's changed. No longer a bully, but a friend. And finally, the title character of this series embarks on her own heroic journey and experiences one of the most powerful narratives in the franchise. She begins as an ordinary girl who dreams of what life could be like outside of their chunk of rock in the sky, until she's forcibly taken to the surface where she's told about her role in the goddess's plan, strengthening the seal on Demise to keep him imprisoned. She needs to build her powers as the Holy Maiden, so she goes on her journey searching for the springs of power. When she finally finds her divine power, she reawakens memories within her soul that reveal she is the goddess Hylia, reborn in mortal form. Her meeting with the goddess is actually a meeting with herself. And with that, she realizes a regretful truth. She had been manipulating Link and their relationship in order to force him into the role of the hero. Worse still, keeping Demise sealed away meant sealing herself for thousands of years until Link can defeat him for good. When Demise is gone, Zelda can finally let go of Hylia and return to being a normal girl, changed. She's no longer bound by duty and can live freely. She chooses to start a life on the surface, beyond the tiny rock in the sky from which she came. So in this game, Link might be the hero, but Zelda is the legend and the protagonist of this story. She faces the greatest sacrifice, pays the greatest price, and has the greatest impact on the rest of the characters, world, and story. The game emphasizes heroism and growth beyond the scope of previous entries in this series. From the way it evolves its world, its quests, its characters, this is a great example of how Nintendo bears down on its gameplay themes and crafts a masterpiece out of them. This is the structure of Campbell's monomyth turned into action beyond the narrative, informing every aspect of the adventure. Skyward Sword is built on the experience of the player journeying into the unknown and returning changed. Was this intentional on Nintendo's part? Were they seriously studying Campbell's work when they were making this game? Probably not. I really hope not. The coolest part about the monomyth is that it's not a guideline for telling stories, but some universally recognizable set of elements that make stories meaningful to us, across disparate cultures, ages, and media. There's something inherently romantically human about going out on a journey to bring something better back home. It's the rhythm of life. We go to work to get money to bring food back to the table of our loved ones. We go on vacation to refresh our minds before we get back to our normal routines. We spend a week really sad and depressed and watching a whole bunch of Community to try and fill that void until we finally kick ourselves into being productive. We always go back, and always with something meaningful to us and to the people that we care about. I like to think that Nintendo accidentally stumbled on this structure because they genuinely wanted to make a game about growth and heroism. And we recognize the elements that make the adventure because Nintendo was successful. This is how you tell a story. This is how you structure adventure. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video and learned a bit about adventure design. If you have any interesting examples about the monomyth in Zelda or other video games, please leave a comment below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe.